Welcome, Comadres and Friends. I am Tess Tobin, Project Manager for Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. The leadership team is pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we are beginning our 19th year. It has been our privilege to support Latina authors throughout these 19 years, and we look forward to many, many more years to come. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat, which is at ReadLatinoLit. Tonight, please help us welcome authors Lalo Leon and Yael Valencia Aldana. I know some of you may have been expecting Sofia Ribalde and her book, Daughter of Fire, but she lives in London and couldn't make this late hour. So what we did is we recorded her earlier this afternoon, and you'll find that also up on our YouTube channel. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can keep your videos on. We suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, but gallery works just as well. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. So now let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Nidia?
Thank you, Comadre. Okay, so bienvenidos, comadres and friends. My name is Nidia Marcella, and I'm the book club coordinator, membership coordinator. Our book club began in July 2004, and in department on our dearest Maria Ferrer here in New York City. But after a brief pause, Nora Comstock reimagined and relaunched the organization nationwide. Her vision was to promote Latina authors, bring our community into bookstores, and support our writers. In October 2006, we began hosting teleconference, and now in our 19th year, we continue to share books by Latina authors with book lovers everywhere. Our book club and teleconference are designed to encourage everyone, not just Latinos, to read more Latino literature, explore diverse cultural perspectives, and gain deeper insights into Latino roots and heritage. We are creating a space where readers can explore the rich inner worlds of Latino writers through their written work. We currently have book clubs in 12 cities across different time zones, and we invite you to join our local chapter that fits any chapter that fits your schedule. If your city isn't represented, we welcome you and your help in starting a new club near you. So for more information, you can check the website. I'm going to put in the chat. So please spread the word and invite others to join our literary community. All right, Maria Ferrer, please take it away.
Thank you, Nidia. Welcome, comadres and friends, to our April 2025 Zoom teleconference. I am Maria Ferrer, Director of Las Comadres para las Américas. Our first interview tonight is with Lalo León. At the age of 20, Lalo was placed in conversion therapy through his local church and remained an ardent adherent to the practice for 10 years. It was not until a series of compounding crises that he stopped the therapy and began to deconstruct the falsehoods that he had been led to believe. Las Bugambilias, a bilingual queer novel, is a cathartic culmination of his time in conversion therapy and retroactively explores not only the damaging effects of conversion therapy, but also the Americentric views of maleness that lie at the heart of the practice. Lalo is a proud Mexican-American, born and raised in southern New Mexico. He holds an engineering degree from New Mexico State University and a master's degree from Arizona State University. He currently resides in Phoenix, Arizona. Interviewing Lalo is Comadre Shirley Janis, a Guatemalan New York-Rican content creator who is the co-host of Geekettes Chat, a movie and TV review channel on YouTube. Shirley enjoys escaping the day-to-day life, reading books, manga, watching movies, anime, and traveling around the world. Take it away, Comadre Shirley.
Hello. Thank you, Maria, for that lovely introduction. Hi, Lalo. How you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for writing your book and being here tonight. No, it was very, I would say this, it was very eye-opening, especially into a world of like, that I didn't understand really. Like, it was, I'm gonna be honest, I was getting like very upset throughout the book. And you talk about violence and like manliness and all that stuff. And I was just like, I was kind of getting a little mad. I was like, okay, hold on. But we'll get into that. Oh, first up, you're from Arizona. I was listening to a podcast of you and they were talking about like the like heat and like you were talking about the heat in February. And I actually want to go to Arizona because of the Grand Canyon. And I'm thinking like, if I can't even stand summer heat in New York, I don't think I could stand summer heat in Arizona.
It's usually Grand Canyon is not that bad, but yeah, usually by June it is a miserable existence even at the top. It's tropical down at the bottom, but on the rim it's easily 100 degrees. You can fry an egg or bake bread in your car.
Ooh, yeah, about probably fried on the ground. That would be me. But yes, let's talk about your very intriguing and very important novel. I'm sorry, my Spanish is not really that great. So I'm like, correct me if you can. Las Bugambilias?
Las Bugambilias.
Bugambilias, thank you. And yeah, so the first question is give us like a brief synopsis of your novel.
So, Las Bugambilias is really kind of a fictionalized version of my experience through conversion therapy. And it really is my exploration of Mexican themes. I was born on the border. My family's from Mexico, and and the clash of me also being raised as a fundamentalist Baptist, contradicting a very Latin Catholic environment. I found that there was a lot of parallelisms between my conversion therapy and what I was seeing, often being perpetrated upon Latinos in America. Um, and a lot of that just lent itself to really bring that story to light. And I involve very strong female characters. I draw inspirations from mi mama, mi nana, mis tías, and really bringing that sense of an identity and the search for one's identity when everything around you is pushing you to be other than yourself. And my book explores things like these very vivid dreams, these very vivid fantasies, and how those things interplay with the reality that my characters live in. I also touch on themes of domestic violence. I was a child that grew up in a home with domestic violence, and those instances also informed a lot of what I was going through, because there was a sense of having to defend myself and stand up and try to be that man to defend those that were being abused, but at the same time I was told I wasn't man enough. And it ultimately culminates in these very cathartic, very, and like you said, very violent instances, which is why my book does have a parental advisory warning on the front of it.
Yeah.
But really bringing together all those different themes and what happens when you clash religion, sexuality, culture, language, ethnic identities, immigrant identities, and all those things. What's the fire that's gonna happen once you bring it out?
Right. And this actually goes to my next question, because you mentioned like inspirations and stuff like that. So Las Bugambilias. I actually did not know what that was, and I looked it up, and it's actually, of course, it's a plant. And I looked at the cover and I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. I love pink. Just by the way, it's not really pink, but it's like fusion and stuff. But that's my color. And I was just like, oh, so I looked it up, it's a plant. And then I looked up like what it meant. And it was like, it means spirituality, vitality, passion, beauty, and resilience. And that was like the word. And I was like, I wonder what the connection between the Bugambilias plant, Michael, Magdalena, and the overall plot of it, and like why you use that as a title.
Sure. And a lot of it was because, in literature, there's always that sense of we represent like women with flowers, and the most common one is a rose. And I don't want that. I wanted something a little bit more Latino, just to say. And for me, being in Phoenix, that is a flower that is ubiquitous around the city. Everybody has them. They're prolific. They're on our freeways is how often we use them. And people get mad because they just leave lots of little, paper little flowers everywhere. But
It's beautiful.
it is absolutely gorgeous, because otherwise it's a desert that just needs, color, because it looks like the surface of the moon. But on the same token about that, it is one of the only plants that's not native to Arizona that really thrives in Arizona. The hotter it is, the more it wants to grow and be bigger. It's like it's growing out of spite. Um, and which really kind of coincided with, a lot of like my female character, Magdalena. She does a lot of things out of spite. She's a strong Latin woman, and que eso no se deja. And she fights for what she wants, even in the face of this very hostile environment, both, religiously and domestically in the home.
She kind of, well, I think that goes back to the plant. I think I kind of made a connection between the plant and her. Like I was just like, she just was the plant in a sense. She was going through so much, and she was just like, she was resilient basically.
Yes.
And Michael too, of course, with everything he was going through. But it was just like she was the fundamental, like, because she was the adult, she's the person Michael's learning from, because that's his mother and stuff. So I know I just made that connection to the plant. So that was, and of course the plant is very beautiful as well. So my next question is, what was you actually mentioned this, this was the question where you mentioned inspiration and stuff like that. What was the inspiration for like Michael and Magdalena's story?
So a lot of the instances that, are recorded in the book have a basis in real life. I was raised by a single mother. Not a whole lot of help other than, my grandparents who were, very prominent in my life. But a lot of those instances, like chapter 13 was a very vivid instance that, I still played with it a little bit to kind of distance myself and have my characters, have their story. But a lot of that information did really come from this. And partially from it as well, from a stance of conversion therapy, is I had actually wrote this book 10 years ago. I had actually started to write it 10 years ago before I, finished this draft. And I was still in the thralls of conversion therapy, but I could never find an ending. I got like 60 pages in, and there was nothing that would actually bring it close to anything where I would say, oh, this is where the book should be. And I would just put it away. I would come pull out the manuscript, read it, not like it. And it wasn't until I finally let go of everything, when I finally started to deconstruct everything that had happened to me, and really say, no, I need to accept who I am. I accept myself as a bisexual Latino, that I really started to understand an ending and where to get to that ending. And for me, it was really just coming together and explaining a story, because like you said, most people don't know about conversion therapy. So it's really hard for people outside of the LGBTQ community to have that relationship, to have that sense of anger, because this is something that absolutely infuriates so many people within the community, is that this is something that still is practiced. But I found a way to really bring in another identity and saying, here's not just the conversion therapy about sexuality, but the conversion therapy of ethnicity, language, culture, religion, and really just seeing how that just really just absorbs into the daily struggle of an immigrant identity.
And I mean, I've heard of it before, but I didn't know like the depths of it, like conversion therapy, like how you go into it, like what Michael, I think it's called dream twisting, that you
Yes.
and when something he has to do something it was almost like he was killing a part of himself. I don't want to spoil it, but you know, like something bad was happening, and I was like reading it, and I was like this didn't feel right, and this didn't feel good. And it was just like, and that's where the violence kind of came into my part. Like, you know, when like the character, the pastor and stuff, and then, you know, Manny and stuff. But like, it was just, and it was sad because like Michael's he's 18, and it's just like, you know, as a Latinx, identify as queer, and you know, I didn't know myself until later, until like my 30s. So I can't imagine like all that questioning, and then you add on to religion. Like I used to be Catholic, I don't practice anymore, and then you know the misogyny and all that. It's like you have to question so many things, and you're just so scared, and it's just like you don't know where to go, you don't know what to believe, and you believe in this one thing, but is actually real, is it true? Like I don't know. I just felt for like Michael and stuff. It just felt real to me, and you know, and also I was listening to the podcast, and you were just talking about how you were in convergent therapy for like 10 years, and I was like, since you were 20, and I was
Yes.
just like, oh my God, I just, you know, I was just like, whew, that's a lot. And you know, it's just a lot of just like not knowing what to do, and just like again questioning everything. It's just like wow.
And I think also, you know, the issue is conversion therapy is, you know, mainly for, you know, what we would consider monosexual, you know, deviancies. So, you know, gay, lesbian type of identities. When you start dealing with, you know, a queer identity or a bisexual identity, they actually told me, oh, that doesn't exist. So you've got to assume that you're gay, deny this other part of you, but then this other part of you is saying, oh, whatever they're doing, oh, that's working. So it kind of makes you think like, it, I guess this makes sense in a
Right.
way, but at the end, it doesn't really matter. And I think that was, I think there's a greater danger for queer identity people when they go into something like this, that there is a sense that you know, as a queer, as a bisexual, you're we're the ones that always have to question it. It's never just a one and done. It's your sexuality and your identity and your understanding of it is always evolving, and it's always understanding. You're discovering new parts of yourself, and to not be allowed to do that, you know, it really hinders who you are and creates a conflict within yourself, that like Miguelito is always in that sense of a conflict of himself and never being sure of who exactly he is until he finally has that final breakdown and is left essentially with nothing and starting out from there. His true birth is the very end of the book.
Well, considering Michael's reflection on the different approaches to masculinity within like Catholic, Protestant, say Christian settings as well. What are some potential areas of significant differences and notable similarities in how these two branches of Christianity might impact the sense of belonging and spiritual journey for like POCs and queer communities?
Growing up in the church, there was a few Latinos in the church, and I wrote it in the book to always refer to it, the brown stripe in the church. And it was funny because we would go to different churches and we find our little group of Mexicanitos, and we identify we're the brown stripe of the church. That we all sit in the same row, we all talk in Spanish and whatnot. But I always felt like there was this sense of even our Latino-ness had to be changed into something that was, far more appropriate for the space that we were in. And for me, especially, like you said yourself, you grew up Catholic. Most Latinos, we have that context of a Catholic Latin background. And in a sense, it's almost like being Muslim and being Arab. It's hard to separate the two because everything is so intertwined. Even our national identity, like as a Mexicano, La Virgen de Guadalupe, that's a religious symbol, but it's also an ethnic identifier. It is also a cultural identifier. It's a national identifier. And when it started to come to really looking at the nuts and bolts in conversion therapy, I went into it having a very solid understanding of who I was as a Latin male. Even though I was queer, I still had that sense of who I was. I was a mariachi. I was in the pinnacle of being the ideal Latin, Mexican male. Charro coming in. You know how to sing and woo and still have that sense of gallantry. But I was always told, "Oh, mariachi is making you gay." So those were the kind of the things that really, really started to play at that it wasn't just so much of a sexuality thing, but it was also a very ethnic and cultural identity that was trying to be forced upon me. I make the joke as well in the book that, watching soccer wasn't going to cure me. I had to watch football, American football, American. And those were, little nuances that started to play into that. And I found myself as I tried to force myself into those ideas and those roles that I just really couldn't find myself in that space. And I really couldn't find myself where I could say, I see myself reflected back. And I wanted that as well as my character to see that he's trying to be something that he's not, and he's not seeing it reflected back, but he does see some things reflected back to him from his Latino side, from his coach, and seeing how there is that sense of maleness. um, you know I don't make excuses for it. It's not necessarily right, but I do know that there is always that sense of the Latin macho and that Latin sense of being forceful, and to be denied that in that context, really, really puts that young identity really at a point where he's not sure of himself. And again, I put that sense of unsurety within the story as the reader is being drawn into that and really having to experience what everybody uses as a basis to identify themselves, their context, when that happens and that context is completely thrown into chaos.
Yeah. And you actually feel that unsurety of like Michael. You almost feel like it's your own. Like you're just like, you feel unsure, like throughout the book, like when you're reading it. And also I love how you just like talk about Arizona. I don't know, like you just like feel the summer heat, like just the beauty of this. And of course you were talking about the plant and stuff and how, yeah, you feel like it's just surviving and it's thriving. So yeah. Do you see yourself or someone you know in Michael and Magdalena's struggles and trials and resilience? I think you have mentioned this like before.
I do see that, and again, it's my story. Well, the details are unique. It actually hasn't been that dissimilar from other people, and you know, growing up, even being here in Arizona, you know, Latino identity is very isolated. You know, that you have to actually travel to it. And I live in a very predominantly Mormon community where, you know, I am literally the representation of diversity here. And in a sense, when you do see that and you see people that have come into that space as well, and I've given them the book and they've read the book, they're like, oh, I feel that little loss of myself. And I think there's also that sense that even growing up, and I think the author Toni Morrison writes about this as well, is when you're an ethnic identity, the idea of upward mobility and upward advancement, you feel like there's a loss of who you are, of your ethnic identity, because you're having consort with a greater American type of quote unquote whiteness. And as you grow up through that, you feel like, oh, there's a little piece of me lost, there's a little piece of me lost. And I think that kind of an identity, having it so concentrated in a book like this, really has that power to bring to somebody's attention, like, oh, I remember when this, I had to let this go because it was moving up in the world, or when I'm trying to be a part of something that I want, but there's something I have to leave behind.
Right. Yeah, and you definitely, you feel like the quest of like Michael's like just identity of like who is he gonna be, who he wants to be, who this person wants him to be, like who society wants him to be in general. So yeah, I don't know, I was just rooting for Michael all the way. And I'm rooting for you as well. And I'm
Thank
rooting
you.
for every like queer or Latinx or POC who's just trying to find their way.
Yeah.
Last question, actually. Are you working on a new book, or are you planning on writing a new book for the near future?
I actually am in the process of writing my second novel.
Oh, cool.
I've already have the name for it. It's
Is
called
it based on a
Colibri.
plant?
Colibri.
Wait, is that a plant?
No, it's the hummingbird,
Oh,
and in Mexican culture, the idea of the hummingbird is, you know, the spirits of those that have passed on, that they come and visit you as a hummingbird. And for me, this novel, I'm writing it from a standpoint of um, speculative fiction. If January 6th ended up turning into a civil war, and having a Mexican family have to escape that, and then realizing a world where now it's the utopias that everybody wanted, but realizing that those utopias, like all utopias, are, you know, doomed to fail. And then how does that Mexican family deal with their own personal loss of the American dream? And with, you know, for me, it was also grappling with, you know, the death of my grandparents, because it was at the time of January 6th, and really having the sense of, you know, finding hope when all things are becoming a disillusionment, which is starting to see as a theme in my common writing, is, you know, disillusionment of, you know, my religious background, or my hope in conversion therapy, where this is now the disillusionment of the American dream, and really trying to see what that play is, and really just trying to see what happens when I put those characters in it. Utopias for me in 1984, all those books, they were all, Eurocentric ideas. What happens for me as a Latino having to look into it? And that's kind of what I'm doing. Is being a Latino viewer on Eurocentric ideas of a utopia.
Wow, I can't wait for that. That sounds very intriguing. No, that actually sounds very intriguing.
Well, thank you.
Well, good luck with that. I can't wait, and have a great night. Thank you, Lalo.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
That was great. Thank you, Lalo. Thank you, Shirley. Our second interview tonight is with Yael Valencia Aldana, a Black Latinx poet and writer. He is the author of the poetry collection Black Mestiza from the University Press of Kentucky, and the chapter book Aliens from Sweetie Press. She is a Pushcart Prize winner, and her work has appeared in numerous national and international publications. She teaches creative writing in South Florida, where she lives near the ocean with her family and too many pets. Interviewing Yael is Anel Lopez, the winner of the Louise Merriweather First Book Prize and the author of the short story collection, I'll Give You a Reason, which was named a Best Short Story Collection of 2024 by Electric Literature. It was longlisted for the Maya Angelou Book Awards and is currently a finalist for the Penn/Robert W. Bingham Prize for the Best Debut Short Story Collection. Anel received her MFA from the University of New Orleans, where she was awarded the Joanne Leake Fiction Prize, and she is working on a novel. Take it away, Anel. Anel? Sorry about that. She must be having technical difficulties. Anel? All right.
Would you like me to read some poetry in the meanwhile from my book?
Anel, why don't you read us some of your poetry, your favorite poem?
Okay, my favorite poem. All right, I have to find it. Let's see. I'll do it quickly.
While you're looking for it, where did you get the Black Mestiza from? Is that you, or is that just the spirit that you wanted to talk about?
That's me. What happened is a little bit later in my life, I discovered my Colombian ancestry actually from DNA. It was sort of a rumor in the family, but I was adopted, so a bit of my history was lost. So Colombians would always recognize me. They would always say, "Are you Colombian?" Um, so a Colombian teacher of mine says, "Oh, you're a mestiza." She explained that's a mixed race person to me. And then an American-born Latina told me that there was no such thing as a Black mestiza, which I found very interesting. So that I turned around and named the book after that. Because supposedly I don't exist.
Yeah, that's a little bit hard for us to swallow. That's yeah, that doesn't. We can see you. We can see.
So I do exist. Should I read the poem now?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is my favorite poem. It's called For You. There was a time in the pantheon, the time before quasars, the time before penumbras were invented, the time before souls, when we were twins clung together, brothers, sisters, who knows, but one skin, one gossamer bubble of thread, dark eye to dark eye. The residue adheres, sticky filaments on the wing. It arrows, it winnows, stretches thin as mylar. It is the most tapered kind of affection.
Beautiful. Okay, Anella's here. She's going to start her questions.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. I am so sorry. I apologize. Sometimes technology here in New Orleans can be an adventure. Yael, I'm so happy to be talking to you today. I really loved this beautiful collection. I think that our works are very much in conversation. But I wanted to start by asking you, what inspired you to write Black Mestiza, and specifically, what themes did you seek out to explore?
Well, the book started in my um graduate school classes. We had to take a poetry class, and there was a famous poet, Denise Duhamel. I was very excited to be in her class, and I was writing these just god awful poems. And then I started to write about my mother, and she really noticed a change. And that's where it really took off, because my mom passed 18 years ago, and processing that loss, because she was so important to me. She was such an incredible figure. Um, when I started to write the poems, I finally started to deal with those emotions of loss, and um, somehow I felt like she was going to pop up from somewhere. She wasn't truly gone, so I hadn't processed those feelings, and I didn't realize that until I started to write. So the last section of the book is all about her. And I just love observing people. I love writing about people. And I would just, start writing these little poems. And then a bit after I graduated, I'm like, well, let me see how many poems I have. Um, and I had about 2/3 to make a book. So I said, okay, I'm just going to keep writing with themes in mind. So there's a whole section where I just talk about people, me looking at people, me enjoying people. There's another section where I talk about people closer to me that I have relationships with. And the first part is about being a Black woman in America, looking at somebody and giving them a head bob. So they all started separately, but when I decided to write a book, I would create certain poems that would bridge gaps to make it a whole thing.
Yeah, I loved it. I think that, you were explaining it really, I mean, you wrote it, of course. But something that I did notice is how, we sort of start with exploring race, right? Specifically identity. But there's always that element of ancestry that you see all throughout the collection. So it feels really cohesive in all of these themes right from the start. I think that for a lot of us with roots in Latin America, specifically for a lot of us who have specifically roots in being Afro-Latino, right, or Black, there comes a moment in our lives, or at least for me, where we reckon with that racial identity. Would you say that there was a specific catalyst or experience that led to that reckoning for you?
Yes, actually, we discussed a little bit before you came back on about why it's called Black Mestiza. And my ancestry is from Colombia, and God bless Colombians. They recognize me. They'll see me and they'll say, "Are you Colombian? Are you Colombian?" It would happen all my life for years, and I didn't get it. And then once I understood my grandmother was from Colombia, and I spoke to one of my teachers that was Colombian, she said to me, we're both mestizas, we're mixed race people, so she explained that to me. And I was in class, and I teach in South Florida. We have a lot, very heavily Latine population. And I was talking about being a mestiza and an American-born young lady of of Latin heritage informed me that I was not a mestiza because there are no Black mestizas. So I just remember looking at her and just, how she was so assured of herself. And she was telling me, even though she was American, she had not been born in Colombia. And I just, because I was feeling this giant kumbaya moment where I was welcomed in, and there's this young woman saying, actually, no, you need to get over there. We don't even know what category you're in. So it just really made me think about to understand the different standing that Afro-Latinas have, and how our identity is policed. So actually, she gave me the name of the book in that moment, and I didn't even know it.
That's beautiful. That you can go back to a very concrete experience, and that, as unpleasant as it might have been in the moment, that something really, just serves as a catalyst for such a beautiful book. It's definitely evident that your poems were influenced by Latin America, Colombia specifically, and our own American notions of race. And I'm wondering, how do you navigate both of these worlds? Because, like you said, right, you're recognized by your people, right? There is, you're in Colombia, you are who you are, you're seen. But that identity, somewhat, like you were corrected by that person, tends to confuse people. How do you navigate those very separate worlds, and when do they coalesce,
It's really interesting. There's a lot of code switching going on. I would say that I don't know about you, but when another Afro-Latina sees the other one, we just are like magnets. We just attract. We're like, oh my gosh, because we found each other, and we immediately form community. I would say in the creative circles that I run in, the Latin community is very welcoming, especially women, to me. Um, so I don't really have to code switch there. I can just be,
Yeah.
Black and Latina at the same time. But in the Black community, there is no, Latin option. You are Black. So it is a full code switch when, I'm in a Black community setting. It's very natural for me because this is the people I grew up with. But that like hard line that is drawn between Black and the Latin community, um, by the Black community, it makes it uncomfortable because I feel extremely comfortable with all of my identities. Once I was traveling from a conference, and I had this beautiful artwork that's based on Gloria Anzaldúa, who is, a Chicana writer. And a Black woman saw me and she said, "Oh my gosh, what gorgeous artwork. Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Oh, I just got it in Texas. It's about Gloria Anzaldúa, and she's Chicana, blah, blah, blah." And the woman just looked at me. She said, she's not Black?" And I said, "No." And then she stopped talking to me. Like, she was angry at me that I had a piece of art, that was not from somebody Black. So because I'm Black presenting, and she just didn't understand why I would get that. So in that conversation, the line was drawn pretty hard. But it's all me. And I think I kind of force people to deal with it. If they want to claim me completely as Black, I just say, look at my last name. It's Aldana. That's like Smith in Colombia. It is obviously there's something else going on in there. You just have to accept me, how I am. But it's definitely, that line is definitely present.
Yeah, I totally understand we were coming from there. I want to ask you about a poem that you have in the collection. It's Zora Neale Hurston. I love that poem, and I don't know, I'm not a poet, I'm a fiction writer, but would you call this a persona poem?
Yes,
Oh,
definitely.
yes.
You
I was
did
trying to
well.
Nail that there. Yes. Tell me about this persona poem, specifically the structure. It's very prose like in terms of how it's formatted, like like a paragraph. Yeah, talk to me about this piece.
Okay. Well, I visit her grave every year. Um, my mother is buried not close to her, but they're both in northern Florida. So I make like a double pilgrimage to go to her grave. So the poem is actually inspired by me going to the grave. And in Alice Walker's book, I think In Search of My Mother's Garden, she writes about discovering the grave, and she fell into a hole and there was snakes and there was grass. So I just thought, and they're not really sure exactly where she is. They sort of estimated, well, she's probably around here. So they put a headstone and, um, like a concrete marker. And I just thought it would be really funny if she's there and she's like, I'm not even over there. I'm over here, but I'm not going to tell that girl because, she put in a lot of effort. Um, and whatnot. And it's funny that you asked me about the formatting of it because um, this poem actually had a different format where it was more arranged like a traditional poem, and actually it was published in Obsidian. It just came out in the stanza form. But
Oh,
my editor for the book, she's like, oh, this poem, there's just something. She's like, oh, it's just feeling more like it's prose. But I can see that because there was just something about that poem that I just couldn't put my finger on. Um, and I that story about Alice Walker fighting her grave, and Alice Walker really brought her back prominently.
yeah.
It was Alice Walker that did this because Zora had fallen into obscurity. And I love the type of person she was. And I just thought, how would she react to all of this? You know? And so that's what I was channeling. And one of my dreams is for Alice Walker to call me out, for Alice Walker to spot me and be like, "You, I have to talk to you about that poem."
That would be really funny. And I hope that she reads it.
Me
I
too.
hope that you talk about it, and then at some point that you share what she says. But yeah, I love that poem. There's something, it's humorous. The voice really pops. So I was really, really, drawn to that one. I mean, they're all great.
Thank you.
But I don't know. I felt like I don't know why I was just like, yes, I think that Zora Neale Hurston would have this essence that's in the voice of this piece. Talk to me about your poetic style in general throughout the collection. So we do have the Zora Neale Hurston, and which one was it right before it, which is also structured, very prose-like, but then you do play with form. Yeah.
I really enjoy uh pieces that have sonic power, that when you read it, you're hearing something. And for me, poems come alive only when they're read aloud. So if I'm reading a collection, I will sit there and read it aloud to myself. That's just the way that the poem is completed. I think when I first started writing poetry, right out of my undergrad career, very many years ago, like 30 years ago, I was a better poet because I was freer and I would just sit and write whatever. But when I came to it so much later, I had all these ideas of what a good poem was, and I was trying to be that. Um, and I didn't have the freedom and you know to come up with the poems that are written earlier in my career. So I read, and then I found some people whose style I really resonated. Like Ada Limon, when I read The Caring, just blew the top right off my head. And I'm like, okay, this gives me permission to write, the way
Mhm.
that I think it should be written. And to me, it's very, very important to push yourself just as very, very hard as you can in your poems to make them something, to elevate the language so that it's not something that could be written in 5 minutes, that it's like crafted and weighted. And really, I learned that from Richard Blanco, because Richard, even though he's incredibly famous and would be willingly published in so many spheres, he labors so hard, versions of versions of versions, to get these poems right, to get them to a level where he's proud of it. And that work ethic, he was one of my professors, passed on to me. And I said, you know what? Richard Blanco could do like 40 iterations, so can I.
That's amazing. So is part of your revision process many iterations of a piece? What does that look like for you? Or I guess you could tell me about your process in general.
Some poems are really hard. I had a Black Person Had Bob. That's the um, Pushcart winning poem. Probably took me 3 years to write, and a lot of false starts, and it just wouldn't come. It just wasn't right. So I just, I kept thinking about it, and then eventually it came. But sometimes a poem will just download, like, boom. I had been trying to write Talisman probably for a couple years. And then one day it came to me, like, it just was like water rushing out of me. And I'm like, oh, let me sit. And I just sat and I wrote it out. I continued to work on it. And what I do for working on the poem, revising, is I step away from it for a minute. Like,
Mm.
try at least, if I have to write something for something specific, try at least to be able to sleep on it and then come back to it. Leave it alone, then come back to it again, leave it alone, then come back to it. So that process just helps me to cleanse my palette and then see opportunities where the poem's language could be pushed, where I'm doing too much and I should pull back. So
Mhm.
time I think is my biggest benefit to revising my work.
Um, I agree with you, and I love the fact that you've mentioned, taking 3 years to write a poem. Because I love poetry. I don't write it myself, but I know for a fact that everyone who writes a poem has gone through the laborious process of choosing down to the most minuscule punctuation, the line, the word. There's so much care that goes into all of it, and it really comes across. Um, did you do any research? Was research any part of writing this collection?
Well, I think it was accidental research, because once I found out that um Zora Neale Hurston lived in Florida, I was interested in her, but I was more interested in her. Really, it was that story about Alice Walker that prompted me to go and find where she's buried. And she's literally buried like around the corner from somebody's house. Like you're in the neighborhood going, there's no cemetery here. What's going on? And then you go past somebody's house and there it is. So I did research on that. I was doing research on my grandmother, who is from Chiniquota, Colombia. So that's in the book as well.
Mhm.
Um, and the first poem, Talisman, that is talking about the different shipwrecks. Um, I was just aware of the I'm fascinated by shipwrecks, but there was one specifically off the Florida Keys, and you could say that um, La Nuestra Senora de Atocha
Mhm.
is in the Florida Keys, very close to where I live. And I had done research on that. So it wasn't that I necessarily did research for the book, but through my different interests, I did a lot of research. And then those subjects ended up being in the book.
Yeah, and I think that it's very seamless. The Edgar Sweet poem, that's what inspired my question about research. I love that piece. I have one last question for you, Yael, and that is, what are you working on now?
I'm working on couple of things. I'm working on a novel based on my grandmother.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm so excited that you said that, because my other question that I was going to ask you was, are you going to give us prose? I just had a feeling that it
Yes,
was coming, but keep going.
yes. So I started writing seriously because of her, because I wanted to tell the story of this young woman who went from Chiniquota, Colombia, to the English-speaking Caribbean island of Trinidad. No reason, nobody knows. So I wanted to tell her story. She had 6 children, 2 she kept, 2 were adopted, and 2 passed away. So I was very, very curious about her. I'm also working on another poetry collection called Cruel Childhood. I did not have a cruel childhood, but the reason I phrase that is because when you're going through your life, people are your main problems. This is your main problem in your life, people, other people. And why are they acting badly? Because they had bad childhoods that they haven't worked through. We're just dealing with a whole bunch of children. So I really wanted to explore that aspect of living our lives, because in a lot of ways we don't leave childhood behind. We just bring it with us.
Thank you so much, Yael. I'm excited for what you are putting up or putting out next. And I wish you success with that. This is a great book, and I'm sure the novel and the next collection will be just as wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for talking to me tonight.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Amazing interviews. Amazing. If you haven't read these books, you know where to order them, right? We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our authors and their publishers, Amazon Crossing, ALV Publishing, and University Press of Kentucky, for generously donating books to our early registrants. Special thanks to our incredible interviewers, Comadre Shirley and Anel. We appreciate our audience for joining us tonight and submitting thoughtful questions. Most importantly, we want to recognize our dedicated volunteers, without whom this book club and its associated work would not be possible. Mil gracias. Supporting Latina authors is critical to our mission. We encourage you to write reviews on platforms like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, as these reviews significantly impact publishers and potential readers. And if you've never written a review and you'd like to know what one might look like, that to help you think about it, we have some of that on our LatinoLit website. Consider purchasing books to directly support our authors. And if your local library lacks a title you're interested in, don't hesitate to request they order it. Remember, our book club, we invite you to attend our virtual book club meeting and bring friends along. And also remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Looking ahead, our May 2025 books are Speak Up, Tell Your Story to Influence Others, a guide to storytelling with a multicultural approach by Susana G. Bauman, and Badass Bonita, Break the Silence, Become a Revolution, Unearth Your Inner Guerrera by Kim Guerra. Thank you all for your continued support of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. And please join us in celebrating Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Let's applaud and amplify diverse literary voices throughout the year. Good night, and remember, always read Latino Lit.